undisputed, most diabolical fantasy villains in the world, Fantasy Brains!
What's up, Brainiacs? Well, welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Brains podcast. And I'm very excited to bring you this episode today, as it is episode 8 of the 32-team series. For those who have not been with us for episodes 1 through 7, the 32-team series is a series where I'm going to be going through all 32 NFL teams and analyzing them from a fantasy football perspective. We're going to be going over things, as you can see to my right here on the fantasy whiteboard, stuff like the depth chart changes from last year to this year, the fantasy football forecast, which includes statting out every single player on the offense and kind of looking at how we project them to finish compared to where they're currently being drafted right now and compared to, where they were being drafted and where they finished last year. We're going to be looking at the strength of schedule for each position group, as well as looking at those weeks 15, 16, and 17 matchups for those fantasy playoffs. And then we'll cap it off with some interesting storylines that could change the course of the season. Now, before we get started with today's episode, make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts at Leatherbrains. You can find us on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, where we're posting a ton of great daily fantasy content. So definitely give us a follow there and check out all of our latest videos. And then make sure to also go out to our YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button. And then you can find the audio version of all of our podcasts on Spotify. But today, this is a fun episode. We're going to be capping off the NFC North here with episode 8 on the Minnesota Vikings, a team that is going to be really fun to talk about, a team that I am personally very high on this season. And there's a lot to talk about with a new quarterback coming in after they had a quarterback last year in Sam Darnold that looked absolutely tremendous. So I think for me, the main thing that I love about this Vikings team is just retention. When we're talking about teams that kept a lot of pieces versus teams that didn't. The Lions, in our last episode, we talked about how they lost both coordinators and they lost 2 key offensive linemen. The Vikings kept both their important coaches, obviously including their head coach, Kevin O'Connell, who is a known quarterback whisperer and offensive genius, part of the Sean McVay tree. And so you have J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy is going to be the starting quarterback for this team. There was a lot of rumors throughout the offseason that you have Sam Darnold might get re-signed after having a 35 touchdown season last year and 4,300 passing yards. But no, he ends up leaving, goes to Seattle on a 3-year deal. Then there's some rumors Daniel Jones might be re-signing. Maybe he starts the first couple games. He goes to Indy. Aaron Rodgers even wants to come to Minnesota. And then they say, no, we're going to stick with JJ. Aaron Rodgers goes to Pittsburgh. So I think for me, looking at this team, McCarthy is coming off a torn meniscus, but he was a 10th overall pick, national champion at Michigan. And I love his player profile. I don't think there's anything that he can't do. He can run. He can throw the ball, and I think they mentioned this actually in camp so far. He is a very good touch of the football. He can throw it hard when he needs to, but he can also throw it very light with a lot of touch when he needs to do that as well. And so I think that's something in quarterbacks that is a very underrated stat, something that guys like Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady were always able to do during the primes of their careers that made them so great. So you have Darnold, who goes for 4,300 passing yards and 35 touchdowns. I am excited to see what McCarthy can do in this offense with the amount of weapons that they have. And looking at some of those weapons, we have Aaron Jones, who returns for another season, fresh off a contract extension. Jones is just one of those guys every year that is always going to be underrated. He's been a great back for a while. He had 1,500 total yards last year, 50 catches, and 7 touchdowns. Now, does some of this regress this year? Probably, but he's been a player that's been able to stay on the field, and he's been productive both as a runner and as a receiver, which I think is big, especially in your full PPR leagues, which most leagues these days are. So I think with Jones, a lot of people are a little bit lower on him this season, but I don't really see it because he only scored 7 touchdowns last year. And a lot of people are low on him because of the new addition of Jordan Mason coming over from San Francisco. They did trade for him. They traded a mid-round draft pick for him. And Mason's coming off his best season where he had 790 rush yards, 3 touchdowns, averaging 5.2 yards per carry for the beat-up 49ers last year. Now, I'll be honest, I actually really like Mason. I think Mason's a very talented running back, especially when it comes to running up the middle in between the tackles. I think he is very explosive, and he's also very good at breaking tackles. And so I think these two backs complement each other very well. And they didn't pay a big price to get Mason. And I think that's where the Vikings have really exceeded expectations, where they're able to get a good running back core right here without really having to break the bank or give up any very important capital to get either of these guys. So I think it's going to be an interesting backfield dynamic, and I'm excited to talk about how I'm statting out those guys. But looking at the receivers, you've Justin Jefferson, best receiver in the NFL, top 3 receiver in the NFL, whatever you want to call it. He is just different. 103 catches last year, 1,500 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Now, again, Sam Darnold did throw a ton last year, but it's Justin Jefferson. I think he's going to produce every single year. He's just too talented not to. And then you have Jordan Addison, who is his running mate, more of a deep threat, smaller receiver that is, former first round pick out of USC. Last year, he had 63 catches, 875 yards, and 9 touchdowns. So definitely scored a lot of touchdowns last year, especially touchdowns over 40 yards, which I believe he had 4 or 5 of those, which usually doesn't happen for most players in the NFL unless you're truly elite. Jalen Naylor is going to be the receiver 3 on this team, who is not going to be fantasy relevant, but he did catch 6 touchdowns last year out of nowhere. So he is somewhat relevant in terms of maybe sneaking out some of those touchdowns. And we'll see what his snap share looks like this year, because they did draft a receiver in the 3rd round in Ty Felton. Round 3 pick. He ran a 4.37, a little bit of a faster kind of deep threat receiver from Maryland. So I think that he's going to fit in very nicely as the receiver 3, receiver 4 on this offense. But again, he's not going to be anything fantasy relevant for you in your redraft or best ball leagues. TJ Hockenson is going to be the starting tight end on this team. Another very underrated player, similar to Sam Laporta in the last episode. Hockenson came off a torn ACL at the end of 2023. So he was out the first 6 weeks or so in 2024. And obviously that's going to limit your production a little bit in those first games back. He didn't go through training camp. He wasn't fully 100% yet. So he only had 40 catches for 450 yards last year in 10 games, which is not great at all. That's about 4 catches, 45 yards, averaging about 8 points per game, but 0 touchdowns. And with Darnold throwing 35 touchdowns last year and Hockenson not catching a single one, I just have to assume that's going to change this year. We saw what Hockenson was able to do the year before, the year he tore his ACL in Minnesota, and how good he was on Detroit before he was traded. So I think Hockenson is a very good talent, and I think he's going to have a bounce back year, and he's going to be the guy on this offense to really exceed expectations from where people, are kind of looking at him going into this season. Looking at the O-line, this is another team where, like the Lions kind of lost a bunch of their interior guys, the Vikings gained an entirely new interior O-line, brand new left guard, Donovan Jackson in the first round of the NFL draft, and then they brought in the Colts center and right guard in Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. So they have a brand new interior, which pairs up nicely with an already great tackle in Christian Darrisaw and a great right tackle in Brian O'Neill. So this O-line also profiles to be even better, which is exactly why I think this team is going to be very scary, in the fact that they had 14 wins last year and they improved. Whereas some of these other teams that might have had similar to that amount of wins lost key players. So very excited for this Vikings team. When we look at how we're going to actually stat them out here in the fantasy football forecast, I got JJ throwing for about 3,600 yards and 29 touchdowns with about 360 completions. It's just so hard to project McCarthy because I don't know what this offense is going to look like. I don't think Sam Darnold is that great of a quarterback. I think McCarthy is better than Sam Darnold. And if Sam Darnold is able to throw for 4,300 yards and 35 touchdowns, I don't see why JJ McCarthy can't throw for 3,600 yards and 30 touchdowns in his, rookie year. So I think McCarthy, people might have question marks, and he himself might have issues. But this Vikings roster is just so elite. The O-line is going to give him protection. He's going to play with the best receiver in football, a great receiver too, a great tight end, a good receiving running back. He has the best potential situation that any rookie quarterback can come into. And so I'm going to buy into the system and buy into the fact that as a prospect, he looked good. And I think he's going to be in for a really good season this year. So I have him currently as my quarterback 18. He's going as the quarterback 19. I mentioned it in my last few videos, but all my quarterbacks in the range of quarterback 8 to about quarterback 20 are all so close in projected points. It's just so many great guys in the quarterback room this year for the NFL. A lot of guys who have potential to have a good season and have a lot of reason to draft them. And I think with McCarthy, he's one of those higher upside picks where he's playing an elite offense. He has the rushing upside as well. And we saw what Darnold was able to do last year with this team, and he was the quarterback 9. So if the quarterback 9 is what Sam Darnold was able to do, then I can assume that at least his ceiling is going to be the quarterback 9. So I think McCarthy's a huge discount right now. And I think that in the situation you have when you're talking about him versus somebody like Jared Goff or somebody like Jordan Love, I'm just willing to bet on the combination of weapons, talent, and upside and rushing upside that McCarthy has compared to those players. But when it comes to his pass catchers, looking at Justin Jefferson coming off a terrific season, like I mentioned earlier, I actually have him finishing as my receiver 7, whereas he's being drafted as the receiver 2 right now. I got Jefferson going for about 1,200 yards, 105 catches, and 10 touchdowns. So I still have him having a monster year. The one thing that I might be low on is the yards, but again, is JJ McCarthy throwing for 4,000 yards? Like Darnold threw for 4,300. Is McCarthy really going out there and throwing for 4,000 yards? I just don't think so. I think 3,600, 3,700 is a really good season. And I think that's a very solid projection for him. And I'm high on him. So if we're saying this offense is going to kick back about 600 to 700 yards of receiving or passing yards from what it had last year, Jefferson is going to take somewhat of a hit and maybe go from 1,500 receiving yards to 1,200. So I'm perfectly fine taking him as high as receiver 2 or receiver 3. I got no issue with it whatsoever, but he statted out in my rankings as the receiver 7. He's an elite talent, arguably the best in the game. So I think another safe pick, another guy who's going to be great whenever he's on the field. And it'll just be interesting to see who is JJ's go-to guy because we don't know who that's going to be. Jefferson's going to be the guy regardless, but I think that'll matter more for somebody like Jordan Addison or TJ Hockenson because whoever he likes more, that's the guy that's going to outperform. The third guy is going to end up falling between Jordan Addison and Hockenson is going to end up disappointing this year because it's all going to depend on who JJ likes to throw to. And so when I look at Jordan Addison here, first off, he could get suspended. He had a reckless driving incident last year and he could miss 3 to 4 games, which isn't anything crazy, but I baked that into the projection. So I only have Addison going for about 700 yards, 60 catches, and 6 touchdowns, which pretty much on a 17-game pace would put him at the same stats that he had last year. I think he's going to be a good deep threat again. I think he's a very talented player, but I think with Jefferson and with the run game and with Hockenson, I just don't know if there's enough targets to go around for Addison to be a high ceiling player, which is why I'm actually going to fade Addison this year a lot of the time. I think that he's good in best ball because he could have some spike weeks with some long touchdowns. But I think in your regular redraft leagues where you have to set your lineup every single week, I think it's going to be really tough to predict when Addison is going to go off. And you could have some weeks where he scores 5 points and some weeks where he scores 20. And so I don't really like those types of players, especially in leagues where you're only starting, 2 receivers. So I think Addison at his price is more of a fade. I got him as my receiver 37. He's going as the receiver 36, so I'm not that low on him compared to what other people think. But I just do think if there is a player that could regress a lot, I do think he is the guy in this offense to do that. Looking at TJ Hockenson, I got him as my tight end 5. He's going as the tight end 6. The biggest difference is I'm expecting him to score more touchdowns this year. I got Hockenson going for about 80 catches, 830 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So I have him having a really good year. And you might say, oh, that's crazy based off what he did last year. But you just have to look back at farther than just one season with TJ Hockenson. He was drafted in 2019. He's been in the league for 5 to 6 years at this point. We have a bigger sample size. Hockenson is a prototypical, very, very solid and consistent, or you could say reliable tight end in this league. And so I think that's going to be a huge thing for JJ McCarthy, being able to use him over the middle of the field as his safety blanket, and why I think that the receptions with 82 receptions is going to easily rank number 2 on the team here. And so I think that's where, I'm a little bit higher on Hockenson. And I would say Hockenson is a guy where he is not similar to Sam Laporta. I don't see him in those elite tier of guys in that top 3, top 4, but I think he is a very, very good tier 2 tight end. But honestly, if you're telling me, hey, I'd rather wait and draft Mark Andrews or draft Evan Ingram or even wait for a guy like Tyler Warren, I wouldn't fault you for it. I agree. I think that those guys in the range that Hockenson's going, maybe you don't want to pay that extra price for him. But I think if you're betting on a really good offense and a good player who had injuries last year, I think that Hockenson is the guy in this offense to really take that step forward from where he was at last season. So I think Hockenson, like I said, I got him at my tight end 5. He's going as a tight end 6. I think it's a good value for, there's not that many good tight ends in the NFL, but I do think talent-wise, he's easily top 10 out of all tight ends. Looking at just some of the other receivers, I got Naylor and Felton combining for about 500 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, and about 50 catches. So that's kind of where those stats are going. Those guys are obviously going to be involved as well. There's always a lot of the time, especially with the Vikings, going to be 3 receiver sets. So those guys are going to eat too, and they're going to have that random good game. Naylor had 6 touchdowns last year. There's no way that they're going to be completely shut out of this offense. So you definitely have to worry about those guys as well. But looking at the rushing attack for this Vikings offense, I got Aaron Jones rushing for about 900 yards and 8 touchdowns, as well as catching 35 passes for 320 yards and 2 more touchdowns. So I have him scoring 11 touchdowns total when the percentages mix, 35 catches and about 1,250 yards. So I have him having a worse season than last year. But that still puts him in my rankings as the running back 13 on the season. And he's going as a running back 26. So I think Aaron Jones is a crazy steal. I think what a lot of people don't realize and what has been so helpful about really statting out these teams and, putting every yard to the exact decimal with each player is that you realize you're not going to have, you have a team like the Browns, you can't have 3 different players having really good seasons. You can't have Judy and Tillman and Njoku all having great seasons because their passing offense is not going to be great. But with the Vikings, I'm predicting their offense to be so good that I think with that, I'm willing to bet on the elite offense and to get the starting running back in that elite offense. So even though Aaron Jones is decreasing his catches and his yards by a fair amount, I still think he's going to easily outproduce his current average draft position, and he's going to be another steal. He, in the past 6-7 years of his career, has never finished lower than the RB like 19 or 20. So I think Jones is always a steal. But I do think Jordan Mason has upside too. Very talented runner, like I mentioned. I got Mason going for about 700 rush yards and 7 touchdowns. So I got the Vikings as a whole going for about 2,000 rush yards, 18 touchdowns. And I think that's where we start to see more of a 50-50, maybe a 60-40 split in favor of Jones for those carries. But I do think that Mason, where he could be valuable, is the goal line. And I think that that's where those 7 rush touchdowns come in for Jordan Mason. I think he's going to play a role. And while he might not be involved much as a receiver, we're talking about upside here. There are very few handcuff running backs in the NFL that I'm actually confident would be great if the top guy got hurt. Mentioned David Montgomery. Zach Charbonnet is another guy on that list. And then you have Jordan Mason, because if Aaron Jones does go down, Jordan Mason could be looking at 18 to 20 carries a game on an elite offense with an improved O-line, and you're going to be looking at a very high floor player on a weekly basis. So I think Jordan Mason, who's currently going as the RB38 in drafts, I got him as my RB44, but going as the RB38, I think that is a great draft pick. In your redraft leagues, I think he's a great stash. If I have Aaron Jones, I'm making sure that I get Jordan Mason, because I do think they both have standalone value because the Vikings could be that good. But if Jones does go down, I think he is going to be an A-tier handcuff to have. And in best ball leagues, I know he's going even higher than that. So, and that's obviously with the baked in upside that, if Jones does go down, Mason has the potential to be a top 10 fantasy running back. So that'll cap off the fantasy football forecast. Let's get on to the strength of schedule here, where the Vikings have the 10th hardest passing schedule when it comes to quarterbacks. So they're going to be playing some tougher pass defenses. It's actually the 5th hardest for receivers. So they're going to be playing some good secondaries, and this goes hand in hand with the Bears and with the Lions and with the Packers, and the videos that I did on them is that the NFC North plays a tough schedule this year. And they play a tough schedule, especially when it comes to these passing defenses. But I mentioned it with these other teams as well. I'm not worried about Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hockenson and Aaron Jones finding ways to get open. That is such a talented receiver room. You have the best receiver in the NFL. I am not worried in the slightest about these matchups. Now, could that matter for somebody like Addison if you're playing a team with two really good corners? 100%. But Justin Jefferson's going to be matchup proof. I think Aaron Jones is going to be mostly matchup proof with his, receiving upside. And I think Hockenson, where you have the tight end position having the 15th easiest schedule right in the middle of the pack. I mentioned in past episodes, I do not look too much into the strength of schedule for tight ends. Don't think it matters too much because of how many different players could end up guarding the position in a given game compared to knowing that it's going to probably be, if you have an outside receiver, it's going to be one of two cornerbacks guarding him the entire game. Whereas tight end, it could be a plethora of 4 to 5 players. So I think with the tight end, Hawk's another player where you're not benching him. He's going to be drafted as a top 6 to 7 tight end. You're going to be starting him every single week. The running backs have the 15th easiest schedule, so another team that's right, or another position right in the middle of the pack. And I think this is great for them because they already had a good run game last year, and now you have a brand new interior O-line and a rookie quarterback, which makes me think that this offense is going to be a lot more reliant on the run than they were last year. And why I don't think that they're going to throw for 4,300 passing yards again, because they have a rookie quarterback and they're going to want to take the ball out of his hands and take the pressure off of him more times than not. But looking at their playoff schedule, they play in Dallas week 15, which is a great matchup because it's going to be a high scoring game, and they play in a dome, which means it's going to be a great scene for weather. They're not going to have to play in a snowy or a cold game. So that's a great game. Then you have the Lions in week 16, or sorry, not the Lions, the Giants in week 16. That's an away game where it doesn't look great because the Giants defense actually looks pretty good right now. But the Giants are going to be one of the bottom teams in the NFL, so they most likely won't be playing for anything come that point of the season, which makes me think this is going to be a really good game for players like Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason if maybe they have a couple injuries on the D-line or the Vikings are projected to win by 7 to 10 points on the spread. I think that this is going to be a great opportunity for the Vikings to score a lot of points and a lot of touchdowns, which will always mean good things for the running backs. And when they have a great defense that's going to be able to get stops for them, it just means volume, volume, volume for the players on this Vikings offense, especially if they're winning games. And then week 17, they're home against the Lions, which is a terrific matchup. Both teams are going to be playing for something. It's going to be a game in a dome, which again is so huge and I think is genuinely so underrated. One of the things that I've noticed a lot is people being high in best ball right now on Eagles and Bills players. But the way I see it, it's Eagles are going to Buffalo in week 17 where there could be a foot of snow on the ground. And that just doesn't seem like that fun of a matchup. It seems like more of a low scoring game. And, I think Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen are both going to be great, but that does scare me a little bit for drafting pass catchers in that game. So I think that the weather of these games, especially come December, matters a lot more than people think. And when you combine that with playing a Lions team that is going to be a little bit weaker in the secondary, I think that this is going to be a great matchup for the Vikings. And at this point, they're going to be so far into the season that we'll really know the true identity of this team. But I think this is a good playoff schedule. I think all the offensive players are startable in all 3 of these weeks, which is just not something that I could say for a team like the Packers, who had a couple brutal matchups in these last 3 weeks. So I think the schedule looks good for all these Vikings players. But before we cap it off, let's just look at some of the storylines. We've covered some of them already, but I think one of the bigger ones is, do they become a more run heavy team with, JJ under center? And I think they will, but Kevin O'Connell has always been a guy that wants to pass the football. He's a quarterback whisperer. He knows how to get into their head and knows how to kind of ease them into everything and make the simple throws, which opens up the bigger throws downfield. And so I think that as we see the season progress, it's going to be very reliant on how well JJ is played. If JJ is slinging the rock consistently and he's able to read the defense and put throws on the money, I'm very confident in JJ and for the passing offense to keep improving throughout the season. But if JJ starts to struggle a little bit, I think that's when they lean more on the run. And so we're really not going to know any of this until the season starts and we see how this Vikings team looks through the first 4 to 5 weeks of the season. And then I think the other kind of big question that we have to answer is there a possibility that Jordan Mason cuts more into Aaron Jones' workload than we think? And to be honest, I just don't see it with how good Jones was last year, knowing they just gave him a 2-year, $20 million extension, knowing that he is the receiving back on this team and will 100% have that standalone value. So I think both players could be fantasy relevant, like I mentioned earlier, but I do think they do different things well. And so I think they could complement each other very well. But that'll end off this episode of the 32 team series, which will also cap off the NFC North. I really hope that everybody enjoyed this episode of the Fantasy Brains podcast. Again, make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts at Leatherbrains on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. And then you can also find the audio version of all of our podcasts on Spotify. And then on top of that, this is episode 8, like I said. So we are going to be getting on to our next division next, which is most likely going to be the AFC West, which is a really fun division to talk about in terms of the offenses that have been building throughout the offseason there. So let us know in the comments what things you guys would like to see in future episodes, and we will get that implemented for you guys. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.